Hi, I'm Dr. Jane Levesque, and this is the Natural Fertility with Dr. Jane podcast, where we uncover the real reasons behind your fertility struggles. And in this episode, I want to go through chronic fertility. So someone who has been struggling with fertility issues for more than 3 years, and some of our treatment approaches, the hierarchy in how we treat our chronic fertility patients and the different stages that we go through, so we can help couples get to the root cause of why they're not able to clear certain pathogens and why they're not able to essentially conceive. And I'll say that in my practice now, we're seeing a lot more chronic fertility cases. Unfortunately, there's just a lot more couples who are struggling to conceive for 3, 5, 8, even 10 years, which is absolutely heartbreaking, because the couple that started trying 10 years ago was told they have unexplained infertility. And now they're being told that they're too old, and that's why they're struggling with infertility. And we know that that doesn't make sense, because 10 years ago you weren't too old, but now you quote unquote are, and no one still has figured out the root cause of your fertility struggles. And for some of our patients who are very driven to find out the root cause, and they've done a lot of functional lab testing, the issue that I'm seeing is that you are seeing practitioners who don't specialize in fertility. And so you're still getting fragmented pieces of information, or you're getting someone who specializes, let's say, in Lyme or in mold clearance or in whatever, yeast infections and candida. And so you just focus on this one aspect without really looking at it through a fertility lens and everything else that's involved, whether that means involving your partner or whether that means looking at other nutrients and mitochondrial function and methylation to make sure that that infection actually properly clears. You're not treating just one infection, you're looking at the whole terrain. This is how we see couples just get stuck on these really long kind of, hamster wheels, because they're not getting all the information at once. So I want to share what we do and the kind of questions that we ask in order to make sure that our couples get to answers as quickly as possible, so then we can get to correcting the issue as quickly as possible, and then obviously helping couples conceive and bring home healthy babies. And what I want to preface this with is, when I first started practicing, I didn't know about the hierarchy of treatments in these different stages that I'm going to share with you. So this is after 10 years of being a naturopath, almost 11, and having a lot of different mentorships and having a lot of different types of patients who have taught me a lot. I am slowly being able to figure out this process, and I want to share that with you today. And I also have just appreciation for the fact that it's going to take me, it's a process that I'm going to continue to evolve. And I want to continue to get mentorship to get better and better at this, because when I see something not working, I get really frustrated. My patients get frustrated, of course, but I almost get more frustrated than them, because I know something was missed. Our bodies are designed to heal, and they're designed to work as they should. But when we're missing certain components, it's just not going to do what we want it to do. So you have to dig a little bit deeper, and whether that's more testing or figure out something about history, or it's actually addressing something completely different, to make sure that we can actually get to the root cause. So I'm going to share my screen today, and we're going to go through, for chronic fertility cases, some things that you need to be thinking about. So before anyone comes to us, so chronic fertility, I would say anyone that has been struggling for more than 3 years, really more than 2 years, you don't have to be, it depends on each individual person. But if you've been struggling to conceive for a while, I would say it's chronic fertility. The first thing that when I want to do is, number one, I want to take a really good history, and I want to understand what's the symptoms that's happening now. I want to understand the paternal and the maternal history, and I want to understand your past medical history. That's really important. Otherwise, we're just going to repeat things like why treatments worked, why didn't, what happened, what kind of data was tracked, why it wasn't tracked. So we can kind of understand the missing pieces. We don't want to redo things that you've already done. Before we consider actual treatments and the stages that we're going to go through with you in a second, I want to fully understand the landscape, like your terrain, what's going on in the digestive system, what's going on in your environment, what is actually happening with the system. I want to understand what your immune system is doing. Is it hyperactivated? Is it suppressed? because it's been working so hard. This is, again, some further deeper testing that I typically do, but we want to understand the full function of the immune system and its capacity to be able to fight off and overcome the pathogen. Is there something in your environment right now that's feeding the pathogen? And whether that's diet, lifestyle, environmental toxin, travel, or etc., is there something that's feeding the pathogen? Is there mold? Is there mast cell activation syndrome, which is really, we're talking about histamine and histamine intolerance, which is going to be typically, it's driven by the pathogen. And are your elimination channels open? Are you pooping? Here we go. Are you pooping? Are you sweating? Are you hydrating well? And are you peeing things out on a regular basis? And do you have enough energy in the body? We need energy to be able to eliminate pathogens. So when I'm taking down the history, these are some things, and I'm taking down the test, these are some things that I'm thinking about. And this is what your practitioner should be thinking about, because if we don't fully understand it, we're kind of poking the bear without fully knowing what's underneath. And this is when infections don't come alone, and when we don't really understand what we're dealing with, and we're only dealing with one pathogen in isolation, we don't tend to actually resolve it. So whether that's an yeast infection that's recurring, bacteria vaginosis, it's chronic mold, it's parasite detoxing that you have been doing for years now and hasn't made a difference, or it's Lyme treatment that's like, oh, for some people it just takes a long time. I think minimum 6 months for Lyme, but it's not years. So the same with mold. Mold really depends on the person, how long it's been part of you. My husband is, I have a lot of experience with mold because of my husband, God bless his soul. But when something takes years, it's usually because there's other components that haven't been addressed yet that we need to address, but the person should still be getting better and feeling better. So let me talk you through in terms of stage and the hierarchy of treatment, because that's really important. And what I want you to listen for is potentially some of the mistakes that you maybe made in your journey, and not because you're a bad person, but because you obviously didn't know about it, and the practitioner who was sitting in front of you also didn't know about it. And I just say this because I've been that practitioner who didn't know about it either, and this is how I got here. I challenged myself to figure it out, and I got mentors to help me instead of blaming my patient. So if you ever feel that someone is blaming you for your condition, it's likely that that practitioner feels out of scope. They no longer know how to help you, and they don't want to challenge themselves. They're kind of just looking at it with, here's what I know, this is usually works, and if it doesn't work, you're the weird one. And in my eyes, I think that's not a complete care, because we as practitioners will always have patients who comes to us who are going to challenge us. And I think that's part of our growth, and something that I'm really open to and teach all of my practitioners in practice to be open to. Our patients teach us a lot, and it's important that we take those lessons. Otherwise, the lesson will continue to repeat itself until it is learned. So what I'm seeing now that's really important is spike protein treatment. And whether you've had COVID, which you probably have, or you had the vaccine, and maybe you didn't, the spike protein, I have tested it in some patients. I'm not testing it in everyone, but there's a lab that I love in Germany that does the testing, and it's very accurate, but also eye-opening of how many people have spike protein. So we need to do some spike protein clearance, and the big goals here is you need to make sure that you decrease inflammation, and you need to clean up your environment, and bowels are moving. You should be pooping 1 time a day minimum, and it should be really good volume if it's just 1 time, but typically I'd like to see 1 to 3 bowel movements a day, well formed and full, feeling emptied every time. You should be sweating. And what I mean by that is if you go into a sauna, you should break a sweat. I used to be one of those people who never sweated because my mitochondria function was poor, and because I didn't have enough sodium and electrolytes. And so it's not a good sign when the body doesn't sweat. You need energy to sweat. You need mitochondrial function. So for those, especially ladies, when we have the cold hands and feet and it takes us forever to break the tiniest little bit of sweat, that's usually a bad sign, and we need to focus on rehydrating and optimizing that mitochondrial function. And then we also need to make sure that the sleep is good. So the spike protein clearance, there's a lot of things that we do using things like ivermectin and curcumin and some biofilm disruptors to really help with that immunosystem modulation to actually clear the spike protein itself. But then we're looking at optimizing the environment to help prepare it for healing. This is really important, this phase. Honestly, minimum is 4 weeks, but as long as 12 weeks, and it very much depends on what else is going on. Now, I'm not necessarily only doing this, but at first I only start with this, and then I'll layer in other things as we go, depending on how the person is responding. The last thing, that I forgot to add in here is just vascular support. We are seeing really big impacts with COVID and the vaccination with both on the cardiovascular system, but the vasculature in general. And I find that most people need some kind of support now. And so that's really, really important. Now, stage 2, 3, and 4 are kind of done at the same time with some exceptions, if you will. So I'm going to walk through that. Stage 2 is when we start the pathogen specific treatment. So when I talked at the beginning about the landscape, what I really want to know, the terrain, is like, what are the pathogens that we're dealing with and where are they sitting? Do we have things in the gut, the vaginal microbiome, the bladder, the blood? Where are things, the nervous system, the sinuses? Where are things sitting and what's what? Because the hierarchy of what we treat is really important. So this is where the hierarchy comes in. You cannot treat it in any other order, otherwise it doesn't work. And usually it goes biggest to smallest. You want to get the big things out of the way so you can get to the small things. And the smaller the things are, the smarter they are, and the deeper they are intertwined with our DNA, our mitochondria, and our cells. So you cannot get to the small things. You got to get the big things out of the way. So we're talking about things like worms. Then we're talking about parasites. Those are, worms need to be treated first. Then we go on to the parasites. Yeast and mold is next. And what I'll tell you is usually when I see really high mold, but I don't see parasites, I almost always assume there's parasites because the parasites hold on to the mold. And then we go into bacterial, and bacteria does involve the molecules. So things like ureaplasma is in here. And also we look at things like tick-borne and Lyme. And then last but not least is we go into viral. So EBV, HSV, CMV, etc. So what I see, usually the virus is always there. It's such a big component of development for the human beings, and all of us have some kind of dormant, expression of it. There's a whole, it's probably a topic for another day in terms of, well, it's dormant. Do I really need to do anything with it? It depends if it's driving anything. Just because the virus is dormant doesn't mean other pathogens are not being held in place. So this is very individual treatments. But essentially, I've seen patients with chronic EBV and they're treating EBV, but they also have parasites and they also have mold and they also have Lyme, and the practitioner's trying to treat EBV and they're not addressing anything else. Or they did a little bit of parasite cleansing and then they kind of left everything else. So there's within each category, we have, as a clinic database, we have this pathogen table, and it's just like this ginormous table with all the different infections and how you would want to address them in the pharmaceuticals, and that you want to really understand what you're dealing with. I think that's the biggest thing that I want to let people know. If you're struggling with chronic infertility and you have a bunch of these pathogens and Lyme and mold and all the stuff that has been thrown around, and you probably have endometriosis and you probably have PMOS, and these pathogens are probably driving that disease, you have to understand what you're dealing with, and you have to bring your partner on board, because I can't tell you how many times I've tested the partner and you're just passing things back and forth and you don't know who started it, but you know that both partners have it. So this is really important to address it. So the hierarchy here is important. The ability of the person to clear it is going to depend on a couple of other things. And this is why stage 3 and stage 4 and 5 are really, are part of this. So we need the hierarchy. We might need to do a pulse off depending on the person. You definitely need to manage some Herx reaction. If somebody is Herxing a lot, you're not supposed to feel terrible when you are on your healing journey. There's times where the body is definitely going through something, but my rule of thumb, if it's more than 6 out of 10, the discomfort is more than 6 out of 10, and it's more than 3 days, we're pushing the body too much, and it's actually because there's too much inflammation, the bowels are not moving enough, the sleep is dysregulated, the body doesn't have, the mitochondria is not supported enough, the methylation is not supported enough. We don't need to be powering through things, and I see that all the time. We're almost wearing that as a badge of honor, that I have these Herx reactions and my body is working through things. It actually tells me that the body is crashing and it needs more support, and we need to pull back. So stage 3, you want to make sure that the detox pathways are supported. That's really important. And so that's not on its own. It's as you start the killing, the detox pathways are supported, and it depends on where the pathogen is sitting and, what's going on in your system. So whether that's liver, we're thinking phase 1 and phase 2. You might be thinking about vascular system here as well. So if there is a lot of that, I don't want to say thicker blood, but clotting and, the COVID and the vaccine component, that might need a little bit more vascular, and I'll put lymphatic system, because those two are so closely related. Obviously, bowels are in here. I would say that sometimes there is the neurotoxic component. So nervous system is supported, and the bladder, urinary, we're getting rid of stuff, and it's not, you're binding it up. The lymphatic, sweating, all of that is in here. Again, I just look at the testing. Kidney is in the urinary. I just look at the testing and see where the body needs more support, but almost everybody needs the liver support, the bowels, some kind of vascular, and again, it just depends on the dosages and what. Stage 4, again, done alongside stage 3 and 2, is biofilm disruption. So I don't know if you know this, but pathogens like to hide. They don't want to die. They want to stay inside your body. You made them a really nice home. You're feeding them nutrients. They're hanging out. And just like any organism on this planet, the organism is designed to survive. We don't want it in the system because it's feeding off your nutrients. And the bugs like to form this biofilm. And so you take the antimicrobials, and you've taken them for 3 months, and then you look at your blood or you look at your urine, whatever, and you're like, the thing is still there. It's still sitting in the vaginal microbiome. It's still sitting in my gut microbiome. It's still sitting wherever. It's not, it's hanging out. And that is because we haven't disrupted the biofilm to essentially break open these little, I don't envision them as capsules, but we can kind of almost, it's encapsulated. So you're just breaking it open so then these pathogens can get out. And then, of course, as you break it open, you can create a little bit of Herx reaction. So you have to be very, I don't want to say gentle, because sometimes you need to be gentle and some people need, a harder hit. But you want to essentially break up that biofilm and then make sure you have something that's going to sweep it up. And that's, the biofilm, and that's the fiber and the binders that we want to make sure we're always have on hand. So the biofilm disruptors, you want to make sure that you have some for each system. So it's based on location. So again, we're going back to where's the infection actually sitting? What's the terrain? And is it, when we have things like in the pelvis, let's say there's tubal damage, there's ectopic pregnancy history, there's chronic pelvic infection is present, there's different types of biofilm disruption. Then, when you have a vaginal microbiome infection that's really stubborn, or you have something that's sitting in the sinuses because you've been exposed to mold and you have these chronic sinus infections, which are often treated with antibiotics. And the sinus infections are almost always fungal, related. So it's literally not making anything better. But whether it's in the pelvis, in the sinuses, in the bowels, in the vaginal microbiome, we want to make sure we have some kind of disruptor that essentially just breaks out the layer, so then we can get a little bit further in. And then stage 5 is really about symptom management. So like I said, my rule of thumb is you shouldn't feel worse than a 6. The symptoms shouldn't be worse than a 6 out of 10. So when I ask you 10 out of 10, how bad are your symptoms? How much is it disrupting your life? Whether that's your energy or your bowels or your acne or whatever is happening, or anxiety, because that's a big thing that can happen. If it's more than a 6 out of 10 and it's more than 3 days, then we know that the system needs some support. And each symptom actually tells us something. So if you have really low energy, I am thinking that your mitochondria is probably struggling. And I'm thinking that methylation probably needs a little bit of support. And I'm thinking maybe some adrenals or your thyroid needs some support. And we need to be looking and addressing that. So the testing becomes really, really important. If you have a bunch of brain fog and, you just feel like you can't think straight, well, we're thinking that there's probably a neurotoxic load in the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system in your brain is not draining as well as it should. I actually see this a lot with long COVID, okay? And ivermectin is one of the best ways to treat that. Now, I'm not saying you should go and do ivermectin on your own. You should be doing it with a supervised practitioner. But this is one of the most common reasons I have patients will start ivermectin and go, I have such crazy brain fog. It actually just tells me that it's exactly what they need. If you have a lot of joint pain or muscle pain or nerve pain, I am thinking about the cytokine excess. And you can also think about things like the Lyme and Bartonella, because it often sits in there. And sometimes a little bit of parasitic myositis as well. So it's typically a Herx reaction, and we're going a little bit too strong. So you need to either pull back on the killing things or increase the drainage and energy things so the body is not as overwhelmed. Sleep disturbances. If you're not sleeping well, again, I am thinking about the cytokine suppression of sleep hormones, and then there's usually some kind of HPA axis dysregulation, and you want to make sure that the person is sleeping. If you're not sleeping well, you're not going to be able to detox. So whether that's including some sleep support or pulling back on some things, that's really important. Hormones. I think when you're starting to see hormonal imbalances, and whether we're often get our women to track through a needle as we're doing this, and sometimes you're like, I'm ovulating a lot sooner than I did, or I'm ovulating later, or my progesterone is not rising, or something is going on with my hormones. And it is essentially connected to whether cytokines are going to be connected to everything here. I am thinking about detox capacity and just really high inflammation load, which typically impacts the cortisol, and the cortisol is going to disrupt quite a bit. I think that there is some mood imbalances, and usually it's agitation and frustration and a short fuse, and usually there is some kind of, it's neurotoxicity, and it can be connected to Bartonella. So when you look at this, then I'm looking at symptoms and I'm thinking, okay, what is this person missing? And then I'm scrolling up and thinking about the detox pathways. Am I biofilm? Am I disrupting too much? Am I addressing the wrong pathogens at the wrong time? Do I not have enough digestion support? So that's where the fiber and the binders come in, and the clean diet. Are they still trying to eat processed sugar and their body is essentially just going to reject it? Are they still living in mold? I think that's huge. Sometimes when you try to detox and the person is still living in mold, it's just not going to work. And, essentially, obviously, they're going to Herx, and we need to get them out of that house. Now, once we've done the killing and we want to be sure we're done, then we can go on to the microbiome restoration. And that's not necessarily doing probiotics. Sometimes it is just focusing on the prebiotics and the good fiber and the good diet and all of these, essentially good hydration instead of introducing new bugs. So I am changing the way that I look at probiotics, because I've seen so many stool analysis now of somebody who has been taking probiotics for so long, and essentially there's like zero improvement in their gut function, that I don't think it's doing what we think it's doing, and there's a lot more to it. So I'll just leave it at that, because there's just a lot more to it. And I think the diet and the hydration, the prebiotics, the fiber, even the binders, if we're trying to get rid of something, and actually just getting rid of the pathogen. My own personal story, when I cleared ureaplasma a couple of years ago, first of all, I didn't know I had it. I had some bladder symptoms and some pelvic floor symptoms, which are assumed were just connected to post-birth. But then when I tested, I had the ureaplasma. Now I know my system really well, and I've already done a bunch of parasite cleansing and mold and yeast, so I knew I could just jump right into the protocol, and I actually cleared it within that 6-week mark that we want to expect our patients to clear it, because I've already done a lot of pre-work. But the way that we do is we treat the ureaplasma, we do the antibiotics combination followed by 4 to 6 weeks of antimicrobials. We retest again around ovulation, continue the antimicrobials until we get the test results back. And then when the test results are back, we can essentially make a decision. Do we need to keep going on the antimicrobials, or can we stop and now focus on microbiome restoration? And when I tested the first time and I found the uroplasma, it was quite high, and I had very low lactobacilli species in the vaginal microbiome. When I finished the killing, the antibiotics plus the antimicrobials, pretty heavy duty, and I retested. I haven't done any probiotics yet. My vaginal microbiome had no uroplasma, so that was great. It was completely cleared, but my lactobacilli species were already much higher. So the lactobacilli species just came up because of the environment. There was no longer a pathogen that was causing the issue, and the environment allowed for the good bugs to grow. So I didn't have to do a lot of microbiome restoration because it was essentially done through the diet, the lifestyle, the hydration that made it come back to where it needed to. So I hope that you guys find this helpful in order to see it like this, and then potentially, I've just had so many patients, and you'll see and hear their testimonies on the website where they've come and they've done so many heavy duty detoxes, and whether that's heavy metal chelation or Lyme or mold, and they still are just not anywhere close to where they want to be in terms of how they feel, but also not close to getting pregnant. And it's because these fundamental pieces have been missed and the hierarchy of treatments have been missed. So they're not, there isn't proper testing around. The practitioner is just hyper focusing on one thing because that's their specialty. I don't want to blame them, but the body doesn't work that way. So you have to be able to step out and look at all the different pathways that are addressed, and pathogens never come alone. So if you're only a Lyme specialist, but you don't understand the other components, you're going to miss them out. And typically, if you're a practitioner and you're specialized in Lyme, I doubt you're only treating Lyme. You probably are treating other things, but typically methylation is not addressed. The other partner is not addressed. Some hormone components are not addressed. And I find that those pieces are important in order to make sure that the treatment works. So hopefully you can watch this, listen to this, and go, okay, I see why I missed things and what I need to do next. And if what I'm saying really aligns for you, please go ahead and fill out an application, and my team will review it and get back to you. If we can help, we'll show you what that looks like. If we can't, we'll make sure to point you in the right direction. But either way, I hope it helps you understand the process and the hierarchy of treatments, so then the body can actually do what it's designed to do, which is clear these pathogens and then be able to conceive naturally or with the help of IVF, depending on where you are in your journey. Again, we can tell all of that information by using data. So thank you again for being here. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.